I'm Lauren Berggren here with RunSignup, and I work with customers. Welcome to today's webinar on RaceTrends and our 2021 Annual Industry Report. I want to introduce Johanna Good, Marketing Manager, who will help us build a better picture of recovery in the industry and take a look at where we think trends are headed in 2022. Thanks, Johanna.
Thanks, Lauren. All right, so just a couple of quick things before we get started. We have a lot of webinars upcoming, partially because we were not able to do our winter symposium and partially because February is downtime for a lot of race directors. We wanted to get a lot of content out now while you guys have some attention and some time to do it. First up, tomorrow, we have a product roadmap webinar with Bob and Allison. They're gonna go over all the new technology that's coming in 2022 and what kind of things you guys can look forward to. So that should be a really fun one. The next week, we have a webinar on managing event volunteers, using the volunteer system that's built into your race dashboard, as well as volunteer check-in. The week after that, I'm really excited about this one. One of our customers, Porter Bratton, is going to be joining us to talk about the steps that they've taken to build a carbon neutral race organization and things that you guys can do to implement to help improve your own carbon footprint. Finally, then at the end of the month, we're going to do one on event renewal and participant management. A lot of this is just how you renew your race and what kinds of things you might want to look out for if you've had some weird postponements or cancellations over the last 2 years as you're renewing your race. Who we are, very quickly, I think most of you know us. We were founded in 2010 to build free and purpose-built technology for endurance events. We support over 25,000 events and 10,000 nonprofits now, and really we put in there that we're a partner to grow your base because we only make money if you make money, which means it really is our mutual goal to help your event succeed and do well. A couple of things we're going to cover here. What kind of recovery we've seen this year, the types of trends we've seen within events, registration, promotion, giving, and then race day, all the way through trends. So recovery and adaptation, this is going to cover participation levels and event cancellations. Important thing to note when we talk about this report is that it is built off of the data on the RunSignup website because that's what we have access to. So we throw this in here not really because it has a lot of significance to how your events might be doing, but just to give you an idea of the scope of data that we're working with. This year it was about 59,000, 60,000 race events. So that means like a 5K, a 10K counted separately, different race events, as well as about 6.4 million participants. What this data means, we've estimated that we think this calculates for about 30 to 40% of the endurance market share. That's a pretty significant, a number to look at to get some real idea what the trends are across the market as a whole. Obviously, there are some places where our technology may impact specific trends, and we try to be transparent about that if we think it's based on something specific to our platform and not an industry-wide trend. Caveat to this, the year that we use for the vast majority of the reports is actually December of 2020 to November 30th of 2021. If there's anything different in there, it's stated, but we do that so that we can get the data together and out in a timely manner. Survey data, there's a couple of notes at the end that is actually pulled from our timer market survey. Some of the timers may already have seen some of that data. I know Shelley did a really great debrief on that earlier this year. But some of that is good insight at looking at what's going on in the market from a timer standpoint as well. So there we go. This is always the big one every year. The top line thing that we look at is, are events growing or shrinking? Obviously, last year, this was a huge drop in event participation. So what this looks at specifically is events that were on our platform in 2020 and in 2021, so that we can see if within that group of events, they saw growth or decline. That means we're taking out new events that are coming onto our platform or events that may have been moving around. It's only looking at events that were there for both years. This year, pretty encouraging. We saw 21.6% growth compared to 2020. That does indicate that events, who have been putting on events in 2020, probably virtual or modified types of events, did see growth this year as they were able to get back to a little bit more of a normal event strategy. Because of the nature of this year, normally we only look at 1 year to the year before it in terms of event participation, but we knew there were a lot of events that didn't take place in 2020 at all. It was a little bit harder to gauge what real participation was like compared to normal by only looking at 2020 and 2021. So we ran a separate report that's tabulated a little bit differently, but is similar in what it's looking at. Looks directly at events that were on our platform in 2019 and then that came back in 2021. And compared the participation levels for each of those. What we saw there was about a 23% drop in participation from 2019 to 2021. Really does point out that there was still a pretty insignificant impact from the pandemic on a lot of events. The encouraging thing that you can see here is that event participation went up throughout the year. We were getting much closer to 2019 levels. I think October was the best number at about 12%. Decline from 2019. So we did see a lot of improvement throughout the year. And I do think that we'll continue to see this improve, particularly after we get past this Omicron range as we're moving into 2022. The other kind of side thing, I don't think I put this on a slide, but if I did, I'll get there. We actually ran this regionally because there's been a lot of discussion about how different areas have responded to the pandemic. And while there's definitely going to be specific local changes, it was interesting to see that across the country it was actually pretty consistent in terms of how much impact we saw in participation from 2019 to 2021. Weekly transactions, this is just transactions on our platform. I really include this for two reasons. One is just to show you kind of that trend that is moving where we were below a 2019 level early in the year, and then we're able to come up above 2019 levels about mid-year and kind of stay there. The other thing that I just really like about sharing this is how normal the trends look. I think it shows you, there was a little bit of a change in the spring where we were seeing a fewer events than we were used to, but we had the same kinds of peaks and valleys that we always do. Great numbers around turkey trots. You kind of see the same trends picking up, and that does really point out a bit of a return to normal. Repeat participation, so this is not just how many participants were at an event, this is literally how many of your participants who came to your event in 2020 came back to the exact same event in 2021. This has always probably been a little bit of an undercount because it does compare specific race events to race events. So if you had someone who joined the 5K in 2019 and then in 2020 they were in the 10K, they wouldn't show up as a repeat participant. That being said, it's clear that the pandemic has impacted repeat participation numbers. We were pretty steadily at about 17 to 18% repeating in the years prior to COVID. Last year, we saw that drop to 10% of participants returned in 2020. And then this year, crept back up slightly to about 12%. We do think that a lot of this is because of shifts, to virtual, back to in-person. As we'll talk about a little bit later today, the profile of runner that we see for a virtual participant and in-person participant tends to be a little bit different. So if you're switching back and forth, you may be losing some of those people who really liked what you did the year before. Generally, there's just also a lot of uncertainty, and I think that's contributed to some of this. Last thing I'll say is it really does highlight that as an event director, you really need to be reaching out early and often, touch base with your registrants, try to bring in some elements of tradition and why they did the event before. We love emails that share pictures of them, nostalgia and reasons for them to think that they want to come back to an event that they've been at before, now that that trend has kind of been broken a little bit. What we do for this is we look at events that were on the platform. This time, again, we did a 2-year gap instead of our normal 1-year gap. So we looked at events that were on the platform in 2019 and compared them to events in 2020. Specifically for this one, it's only looking at events over 500 participants. This is actually a really manual report that we do, so we don't have the ability to do it for all events, but it does give us an idea of how many events are not coming back. So in 20 of the events that were on the platform in 2019, we saw 18% of them didn't take place in 2021. There's kind of two groups within that. 10.7% of those didn't happen at all in 2020 or 2021, whereas 7.3% of them did have an event in 2020, but not one in 2021. And I think, amongst those, it's likely that the ones that happened in 2020 did a virtual year in 2020 and didn't want to do a second virtual year, whereas those who held off both may have just not wanted to jump into virtual and taken a break. What'll be obviously important to see is what happens with these events over the next couple of years. Do we return some of those 18% of events? I think it's likely that not all of them will come back. So if you're an event director in an area who's looking for opportunity, paying attention to where there are events that have disappeared that are not returning might give you a good idea of what gaps there are in the schedule where you might be able to fill in with a new kind of fun and exciting event. Timed events, we'll talk a lot about how much people were excited about in-person events this year. Again, you can see we have data from 2 different timing software systems, or 3 really, but race day scoring and race director are on the left, how many timed events we had in 2019 compared to 2021, and that means timed in-person races. And then on the right, also there's a run score, gave us their data of how many races they were timing between 2019 and 2021. Like everything, you can see pretty steady increase throughout the year and a lot closer to normal as we get to the end of the year. It's great to see people back out and running in person. Event trends, types of events and participant demographics that we're going to look at. Participation by event type. This is looking specifically at in-person versus virtual. We obviously saw a tremendous number of virtual events and virtual participants in 2020. What we saw this year is, I think, predictably a decline compared to that. We still did have about 20% of participants who opted for a virtual option. Throughout the year, you saw more and more enthusiasm for in-person events as they were able to proceed full capacity and really bring people back in person. So I think towards the end of the year, I believe November was maybe 92% in person, and that was where we kind of peaked. I will say, while this is certainly encouraging for in-person events, and I think if you are an event director, most of you have been super excited to get back to in-person events, and you should be. I don't think that we're ever going to see this drop back down to where it was in 2019, where we had just 1% as virtual participants. So I think you want to think about ways in which you can keep some of those people who have really enjoyed joining you as a virtual participant happy over the next couple of years. There's different ways to do that, whether it's adding a virtual option to some of your premier events, or just doing one standalone virtual a year to try to give something to those people who joined you as virtual participants and really would like to stay that way, without taking up too much of your time and resources, trying to do virtual all of the time. Participation by gender. Prior to the pandemic, we had seen a very slow but steady evening of gender participation. Females have led in registrations consistently, but we were seeing a little bit of evening there. Last year, there was a much bigger gap because, as we've kind of noted, females are much more likely to register for virtual events than male participants. This year, as in-person events have returned, we have seen a lot of the male participants coming back. We're back to about where we were in 2019, with 55.4% of participants identifying as female. The other small note I'll make on this is we are seeing a little bit of an uptick in events that don't have a male or female gender assigned to them. Either they are selecting a non-binary option, or they're just not asking for gender at all because it's a non-scored event. A lot of virtual events, they don't need a gender for registration. So we have seen more falling into that category as well. Participation by age is a little bit of one that makes me a little nervous. Even before COVID, we were seeing some trends that there was some difficulty attracting younger participants to events, and that does seem to be exacerbated, particularly that 18 to 29-year-old age range. We were back in 2017, it was about 18% of all participants. In 2021, that's all the way down to 12.8%. The caveat to that is that it is noticeable in data that in general, that age group is not very excited about virtual events, and that could have had some impact. But given that has actually fallen compared to 2020 when more events were virtual, it's a little bit concerning. I think the things you really want to focus on are the things that appeal to younger participants. So you want to make sure that you have social experiences. Anytime you can have teams and really focus on getting people together and celebrating together. Do like a t-shirt contest with your teams, offer tents where people can hang out with their friends together, try to create some sort of social element. And obviously that's been hard to do over the last year, but as you're more able to do things like adding a fun post-race experience. That can be really helpful at reaching younger runners. The other thing that we see tends to appeal to younger runners is a lot of millennials and Gen Z have indicated that they only want to participate in events that are for a good cause and really have a purpose beyond just them going out for a run. So if you work with a charity partner or you are a nonprofit yourself, you really want to make sure that you're always driving home that cause and highlighting what it is and giving them more ways to interact with it and engage with the cause within the participation of the event. Whether that's through fundraising or inviting them to another event to see your facility later, or having just materials on site about what it is that you do. 2021 size of event by type. So that sounds more complicated than it is. This is basically just how big is the average event. And I really like to include this because I think a lot of times if you read the media about the endurance event, you'd have a little bit of a misleading understanding of what most endurance events are. We see a lot of reporting on your major marathons, on a New York Marathon, or on a Disney race, and those are obviously a big, a lot of people participate in them. They're a big part of the industry, but the vast majority of events are small. 96.1% of our in-person events had fewer than 500 participants. And that's not pandemic impact. That looks pretty similar to what we saw before. It's also pretty similar to what we see in virtual events. It's just true that most events are small. They're small local events. There are, race directors who do this once a year. So if you're a race director who puts on one event a year and you're joining, great, you're putting a lot of time into understanding the industry for the one event you do. And I think that really highlights the need for, research and engagement, and making sure that events are connected with timers and race management companies who have the time to really understand how to put on a good event and help them through, because it's really hard to do when all you do is put on one 100% event a year. Registration trends. This is what we've seen in patterns for registration, pricing, how and when people register. When runners register, we got so much chatter through this year about how much people are procrastinating, and obviously that could be true on an individual race, but it's noticeable that our actual race week registrations, we had about a quarter of people registered on race week. That's remarkably consistent over the last couple of years. I think it's been between 24 and 26% of registrations came on race week every year since 2017. So we're not really seeing a big uptick in procrastination, last minute registrations. The one area that we did see a little bit of a change is an increase in registrations between 14 and 60 days before your race, particularly the 30 to 60 days. So, I think a lot of it is that races didn't open registration as early, so they didn't have the opportunity to register people 60, 90, 120 days out. And some of it is runner hesitation, wanting, to kind of wait and see how things were looking before they committed. You can see that pretty big spike in runners registering 15 to 30 days out. So there is probably some truth to a little bit of procrastination and people waiting a little bit longer than normal. With that, I think there are some challenges in terms of handling swag and race day materials and preparing properly for amounts. So you may want to keep in mind that your numbers 60, 90 days out may still be a little bit misleading. The other thing that you can think about for 2022 is making sure that if you have the opportunity to open earlier this year, you do. You give people some confidence that your event's going to happen. Offer them clear information about what happens if something changes and you can't hold the event, so they feel a little bit more comfortable registering. But I do think this year there's going to be a lot more option for people to open registration earlier, and it'd be good to go out and try to get ahead of that and try to get people in a little bit earlier again. This is the last one on this. This just kind of breaks down when people register by event distance. I don't think it's surprising that they're much more likely to register for longer distances earlier and shorter distances later. Obviously, if someone's registering for a marathon, they want training time. They want to be able to prepare. A 5K, they may decide, on race morning, it's time to go. But I like sharing some of these, that this looks very consistent with what we've seen every year. That the general trend of when people are registering. So it's good to know that there is still some consistency there. And if you're really looking for times to reach out to runners, and try to promote registrations. You always want to have a big push when your registration opens, even if that's a little bit later if you're a 5K. Whenever your registration opens, do a big promotional push then. That kind of 1 to 2 month range, when runners are really starting to think about what their next month or two looks like, it's another good time to do a price increase or a coupon code or something big to try to prompt registrations then when people are starting to feel ready to make a decision. And then always have a good push on event week. Even if we wish they would register earlier, you're always going to have a good number of participants who are really waiting until that last minute. Pricing trends. Across the board, we see prices down from 2019, but up from 2020. The one thing to note on this that I think is really significant is that this includes both virtual and in-person events. So virtual events are typically going to be cheaper, particularly on longer distances, than an in-person event would be. There's generally going to be lower overhead to hosting the event. And if you are doing a virtual marathon, it usually doesn't cost the event director any more than it does to, host a virtual 5K, whereas an in-person 5K and in-person marathon are wildly different logistical costs. So because of that, I think particularly on the longer distances, we're still seeing some lower prices than you might expect. But this is definitely creeping back towards normal. We did see a little bit of an increase back towards what we were looking at in 2019. And I think if you make the assumption that this is still impacted a lot by virtual, it's likely that prices have actually gone up a little bit this year compared to 2019. Obviously, I think we all know that there are some areas in which prices for event directors, organizing things, permitting, swag, that kind of thing have gone up. So I think it's reasonable to think they've actually gone up a little. Pricing strategies. We see about 20% of all registrations came within 3 days of a price increase for registration closing. That's down a little bit. I think we were about 27% before the pandemic. But either way, it's a significant number of people who register when they get a prompt. Price is a really strong driver of registrations. And I actually think the reason that this is down is not that people are less motivated by price than they were, but that there were actually fewer price increases in 2021 than in previous years. We actually do have a chart, it's not on here, that shows that their races on average offered fewer price increases. So that kind of leads to fewer people having a price motivated reason to register. Anytime you're going to do a price increase, make sure that you're promoting it heavily. If you want to set an automated email to make sure it goes out to everyone who's registered, everyone who's been registered before, give them a little bit of a prompt that the price increase is coming up. People do respond to price, and you want to make sure that you get them then, rather than them thinking, well, maybe I'll register later and then never getting around to it. Giveaways, we have a couple of different things that we looked at on swag, but I shared this one specifically because it's one that has not improved over the last couple of years. As we noted, we've got over 55% of participants are female. Only 3% of events actually offered a female specific size. It's probably a slight undercount based on the way that we pull data as it's set up in our system, but it's still a very small percentage that are offering this. Obviously, ordering this year has been tricky. There's a lot of reasons why picking one shirt style can be simpler and easier, but we will note here when we pulled orders that were for a female specific size, we had about 30% of them had ordered either a female extra small or female small, which is going to be sizes that really don't have a comparable option on most co-ed unisex shirt sizes. So, that's a large percentage of your participants. If you're saying 30% of 54% of your participants don't have a shirt that fits them, it's not a really great way to thank your participants. And more than that, we often talk about swag as literally a marketing tool for you. Great swag absolutely is a reason that people register for a race. So you want to make sure you are providing that, giving them the reason to register. And then you want them to actually wear it, because if they actually wear it, again, they're walking around town in your shirt, people are seeing it, they're going to be more excited to come to your event later. Mobile adoption. Mobile, as in registration, this has been growing and growing and growing every year. The chart that's up there is actually views of your race websites. So we can track how many views of race websites came from a mobile device. And that, for the first time, did not actually increase in 2021. In 2020 and 2021, it held steady at 70% of all race website views were on a mobile device. What did go up still is transactions on mobile devices. Back in 2017, I think it was only around 33% of participants were registering on their phones. So a lot of hesitancy to actually go through a financial transaction on a phone. We've really seen that change. We're up to about 58% of transactions are now happening on a mobile device as well. The two key takeaways from that, if you don't have a RunSignup race website, whatever website you have, you need to be not just checking it on your phone. I would go with, making sure it looks best on your phone first. It's more important that it's, easy to read and usable on a phone than it is on a desktop, even because more people are going to see it on their phones. Secondly, in your registration process, keep it as simple as you can. Obviously, there's information that you need. You have to gather key details that you need about participants. But if there's stuff that you realize you could really do without, simplify your registration process. Ask as little as possible. Make it as easy as possible for people to register. And if you do have a sellout event or something that's really time sensitive, you think people are going to be on their phones, we just updated the ability for participants to update their credit card directly in their profile. So that's good to keep in mind if you think people are going to need to be able to register fast. If they have their credit card saved in their profile, that'll help them to get through registration a little bit faster on their phone. Promotion trends, just a couple of looks at different strategies that have worked well. Coupon codes. This has been relatively steady. We did see a decline in the number of races offering coupon codes. I think the number of races using any sort of pricing strategy went down in 2020 and 2021. I think we'll probably see that continue to kind of creep back up. The thing that I really always focus on coupon codes is these are not huge discounts that people are getting. We're up at what, $12.75 average discount this year. It's been between 10 and 15 every year. If you're going to use coupons similar to price increases, the reason you use them is to get people to act now. You don't need to offer $50, $70, huge amount of a coupon code to get that same impact of someone, acting now. So just make sure anytime you use a coupon code, you always want it to be time limited. There's no point in doing a coupon code that someone can use anytime because they'll just, maybe not use it anytime. You always want to say you've got to use this day while it's good, get them to actually register, and don't over discount your event. You can keep it at a relatively low discount rate, and it'll still be successful. Referral rewards, this is always our favorite. We did see a little bit of normalization here after a crazy 2020. I think everything that we looked at that had any sort of social media component in 2020 just skyrocketed in 2020 and has kind of come back to earth in 2021. But we're still looking at about 8% of transactions come from referrals when referral rewards are turned on. It's just a really quick and easy way to get your participants to promote your event for you. It's really low cost because most participants will not actually refer enough people to get a discount, but they will make some referrals that will get people to your event. And if they do, refer the 5 people or whatever threshold you've set to be refunded, they're going to have brought in enough people to make that worthwhile. The one caveat I'll say to referral rewards is, like any sort of marketing program, your communication really matters. You got to make sure that it's always upfront and in front of people. It's in your emails, you're sending them reminders. Have something fun and eye-catching on your website about it. If you give away swag instead of doing a refund, or in addition to doing a refund for referrals, make sure that you have a picture of it and that you're visually showing people what they get if they refer people. It really does come down to how much you are engaging with your participants about the program and not just having the program. Groups and teams. This, again, it's one that's held steady pre-pandemic through the pandemic. Currently, we've seen about 30% of participants join a team when it's offered. Our average size of group teams is going up a little bit, so that'll be interesting to watch if people are really starting to realize there's a team and actually joining as a part of the same team instead of splitting into smaller groups. But this is, it's a free and very easy way to promote some of your registration, some registrations for your event. People want to participate together. People like doing things socially, and if they show up to your event and they have a group, they're going to have more fun. And if they have more fun, they're going to come back. Email marketing. we have a free email marketing platform. And our email has, really continued to just go up over the last couple of years. We've seen, 341 million emails were sent in 2021. That's a great sign that, race directors are communicating with their participants. They're sharing things about their referral programs, about their teams. They really are giving all the details out to participants. I do expect this to go up this year. We just released a great new update to email marketing that has some templates that are going to make people really, really happy. And we will have a webinar on that one, I believe, the 14th. With email marketing, what I didn't put on here, because I have to be somewhat selective, is information about automated emails. Anytime you have the opportunity to set up an email in advance, make sure that it's scheduled and then have it sent automatically to everyone who is registered for your event. That's going to save you a lot of time. It makes sure that you don't forget to send people things, and lets you do stuff like send people an email 2 days after they register rather than waiting until a week out for everyone. So you don't miss people in the interim. You can kind of make sure that you're getting all the key details to everyone as they're registering. So I would really recommend setting up your automated emails to make this process a lot easier. Google Analytics, we just looked at where website views to your race websites are coming from. About 30% from organic search. So again, if you don't have a RunSignup race website, if you're using your own website, making sure that you have gone through some sort of SEO process and that your race is showing up well on Google. That is where people are looking for a lot of races still, so it's important. The last one, Race Insights. This is kind of our other way of evaluating what happens, where people are coming to your events from. This is our internal tracking system. It's what you see on your dashboard specific to your race, about where your registrations and page views came from. This is kind of our aggregate version of that. And what we look at here is how many registrations can be attributed to different sources. So the one thing I'll point out here, similar to what we saw before, Google is a pretty big driver. But the one thing that I will point out here is that Facebook, we saw about 12% of registrations from Facebook in 2020, dropped to about 6% in 2021. I don't think that's reason for alarm. There's probably two things going on there. One is that nationally we saw a huge spike in social media and Facebook usage in 2020 nationally. That's, I think, also a part of why referrals did so well in 2020, is people were on social media and sharing things a lot more frequently. So that just made a huge bump there for that year. The 6.1% is still actually above what we saw from social in previous years. So it's nothing to be alarmed about. If you have a current program that's working, continue to do that. The other thing of note is that there have been changes to the advertising rules around Facebook over the last year, and some of the events that leaned heavily on Facebook as a major driver of registrations have seen some input from that. If you just do 1 or 2 Facebook ads a year, it's not likely to be a major changer for you, but it might have a bigger impact if you are running the bulk of your marketing through Facebook. GiveTrends, how we do on donations. The one thing that we always note, there's a couple of different ways of looking at this, but it's really important that if you're going to take donations through your event, you're taking a range of donations. Ask for levels that range from $5 to $1,000. You see a lot of value from donations across the board. People are most likely to make a donation that is less than $25. But the people who do make a donation that's $500 to $1,000 make up an actually pretty significant portion of donations as well. So you always want to ask for more, but also provide an option for a lower level donor. If you'd rather someone give $5 than look at it and say, oh, well, it just says $25, I don't want to give that much, and move on. Fundraising. Fundraising is, peer-to-peer fundraising within an event can be hugely successful. We saw 630% more raised when a race turned on fundraising as compared to when they just had a donation, donations open. The one thing that I will say with that is fundraising is another one that's not great for just set it and forget it. If you're going to do fundraising, make sure you're invested in fundraising, that you have some resources for your participants about how they can actually do their fundraising, and some tools to help them be successful. Because if they just make a fundraising page and then it never goes anywhere, they're not going to feel great about it. They're not going to feel more excited about your organization. So make sure that you're invested in it if you're going to go that route. If you don't want to go that route, another way to increase the donations through your event is just by adding a donation checkbox on the checkout page. It's a quick box that again says, do you want to make a $5 donation or whatever flat amount you want? And we do find that catches a lot of people who did not donate earlier in the process, who then see that and think, actually, yeah, sure, I'll throw $5 on. And that has a pretty big impact on the total amount raised by your event as well, if you're not up for fundraising. If you are up for fundraising, we can't stress enough, Facebook fundraising is really, really, really helpful to your fundraisers. I know there's a lot of nonprofits who have concern about not getting full data from Facebook, but we really think if your main goals out of this are, one, that you're going to raise more, you are going to get more donations to your organization by enabling this, and two, that you're going to help your fundraisers be successful. Like we said before, your fundraisers, if they feel like they've done a good job for you, they're going to feel more invested in your organization, and they're going to want to continue to work with your nonprofit. So you want to give them the tools to be successful, and Facebook really does make it easier for them to meet their goals. We saw in 2021, 61.8% of fundraisers who had activated their Facebook fundraiser reached their goal, compared to just 15.7% of people who set a goal but then had not enabled their Facebook fundraiser. Race day trends, last section here. The race day check-in app, we saw great usage for the race day check-in app this year. We did some updates to it in the spring, and I think it was well timed with events coming back, because it was a really big priority to have kind of a seamless race check-in process that could be touchless and fast and get people in and out of lines. We got to, I believe, 6.5% of events used the check-in app this year to check in 22% of participants, which tells you that those events were handling a lot of really large events. They were checking people in mass pretty effectively and pretty efficiently. So if you haven't looked at that, it's probably our favorite new tool this year. Not that it's entirely new, but the updated version. Just for it's really efficient and loved by a lot of our timers. Scored results notifications, these are emails and text messages that are sent out automatically to tell people of scored results. Obviously, we saw a big decline in 2020, as there were fewer events in person, but these have come back. I think the one thing that is interesting to me about this always is how many of them are for events that are 100 to 500 people. So I think people often think of technology like notifications as being for big scale premier events only, but really it's something that a lot of events can use to kind of give a little bit of something extra to their event. Particularly as you're looking at tracking options, there's different ways to do it, and it can be good to offer something, some sort of GPS, some sort of notifications, something for everyone to make sure that people are able to engage their spectators and friends and family who are at home and not at your event. RaceJoy GPS tracking. This is our runner tracking app that actually follows runners on course exactly where they are on their phone. I'll start with this one here. We've seen a huge spike in the number of races offering RaceJoy, and a lot of that is because we switched kind of our model of how it's offered to make it more accessible. So RaceJoy is now offered through certified timers. Even if an event is not actually being timed traditionally, they can still work with a timer to get RaceJoy put on the event. And because of that, we've seen almost 200% of an increase over the last 2 years of races that are offering it. But really helps runners to be familiar with the technology and to be excited about it, and to really be able to engage with it on race day. Along with that, the big trend we saw from RaceJoy was interactivity. The number of participants being tracked stayed a lot steadier, particularly because a lot of races in 2020 were using it for virtual events where everyone was being timed via RaceJoy. In 2021, it's a lot more optional, but what we did see is a lot more spectators and more cheers being sent, people engaging through the app, and getting back to some sort of normal level of excitement and enthusiasm around people participating in a live event. Timing business, this is the data that's actually from our timer survey. And we include this because I think it's important. Timers are a really big part of the industry, and we want to really have a better understanding of what timing businesses look like, and the role that they play with races. So most timing businesses that we work with are, owned or partially owned, or sorry, by the head timer. It means they're really small community-run businesses. They tend to have, strong hand from the people who have created them. That being said, a large percentage of them, majority of them also have another job, full-time or part-time job, in addition to timing. It's a hard, timely job that people do because they love it, not because it makes them rich. So just, if you're looking at timers, keeping in mind that this is something that they do because they love the industry, and not because you are paying them $1 million, because trust me, they're not charging you a ton. In addition to timing, timers really provide a lot of services. We call them timers, but in a lot of ways, many of them are also, filling the role of a lot of race management type roles. And I'm on the wrong slide. 47.2% of timers support more than 50 events a year. That's just to give you an idea. A lot of timers work with, a good number of events. So if you're looking for advice about what works well with an event, they really have a wealth of knowledge to pick from because they've worked with a lot of different events each year. So going back to your timer for advice and guidance if you're not sure what to do about something. Which ties into, most of them provide a lot of services beyond just timing. So again, if you're not sure about where to get a shirt or a bib or how to staff something, ask your timer. It's possible that it's a service that they offer. If it is not a service that they offer, they're likely to know someone that they can point you to that does offer that, because they spend a lot of time all year immersed in the industry. And also, I don't have this on here, but I believe it was 36% of timers actually added new services in 2021. So again, I think they're looking for ways to be more helpful and more useful in the industry. So always be asking. Remote timing, this will be one that'll be interesting to see if this comes to fruition. 27% of timers indicated that they plan to time remotely in 2022, meaning time an event with the equipment there without being on site themselves. It's a really interesting idea that can save some money for races that want to have timed events but don't have the money to pay for a full staffing team to be there. It's also not going to be something that we think will work for every event, because there's plenty of events that are complex enough or large enough that a timer is going to want to be on site. But it's something that you can kind of look into and keep in mind if you're looking for timing but aren't sure if you have the finances to invest in a full on-site timer group of timers. Timer technology, this is predictably skewed. Because our timer survey, we did send it out. Anyone could fill it out. It wasn't only our customers, but obviously we expect a larger response of that was from customers of ours. And similarly, Race Director scoring software integrates really tightly with RunSignup, so we expect to see more of those using there than any other one. But just to look at what our responses were for registration companies that they work with. And scoring software, this one is kind of exciting to me personally because our race day team works really hard and has built a great new product in race day scoring. Race Director and RunScore are the two kind of large legacy scoring software systems. They've been 1 and 2 in this chart here for every year we've ever done this. This is the first year that race day scoring has kind of stepped into that second place. And that's exciting just for us to see a lot more adoption of that and people kind of getting used to a newer platform that has the benefit of being built with newer technology, being a little bit easier to learn and to implement. Finally, participant tracking. Nearly 70% of timers offered some sort of participant tracking. That could be, GPS tracking, split time tracking by mile splits, any different type of tracking, a different type of app here. Again, it's probably a little bit misleading on which apps they're using because RaceJoy is going to be offered by a lot of our timers, and that's going to make that end up as a higher percentage there. But it does indicate that runners are really looking for some sort of participant tracking. Any questions, Lauren?
So we have one question I wanted to confirm with you. Are the prices listed on slide 24 the full price or the actual average paid?
It's the actual paid, yes.
Great. And then one more. Where would you turn on donations in the checkout process?
So you actually do that from the charity page. So you have to have charities set up. Even if you only have one, you could just set them up as a charity. And then you go into that individual charity and there's an add checkout, a checkbox. I believe it's like below the description on that page.
Great. And Tim Bomba said, thank you for the session. Excellent info.
Thanks, Tim. All right. If that's it, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're always looking at this all layer.
Thanks, everyone.